Welcome to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We're here every single Monday through Friday. It's Friday today, and if you're listening on the day the program drops, and we're here with the climax of the first part of the Exodus story. So today, the first reading focuses on the Passover. And remember, everything in Judaism goes back to this moment. And don't forget, on the Mount of Transfiguration, whom did Jesus encounter? Moses and Elijah. So Moses was key. And always keep in mind, we'll talk about that at a different time, Moses was not perfect. We know of his interaction against the Egyptian when he was still in the royal family. And we know his learning who God is over and over again. And now we see that we're involved in the Passover. Now, in between all that time, because remember, the first reading on the daily Mass tends to skip around. So we've skipped over the entire story of the plagues, which you can obviously go back and read. This is an important focus, however. Dennis Prager, who has written the Rational Bible series, points out that every one of those plagues, including ultimately the Passover, but every one of those plagues are a recognition and a conquering, in a sense, of each one of the gods of the Egyptians. So what we're doing, remember, I've said this is a whole evolution in thought. So what we see here is we see a change in thought, because now God is making it clear that the idolatrous gods, the pagan gods, do not exist. And if we want to assume some form of existence, because he really says this blatantly later in the Old Testament, but if we want to assume some sense of existence, then we recognize that he alone is the ultimate power. And that's what he's communicating. Always keep in mind that there is a communication going on as well. And do keep in mind this part. And this is one of the things we always have to realize. And this is something that many people in the Catholic Church do not get, especially those who are young earth creationists or geocentrists. So it's important to understand this, that our understanding grows. Now, people will say, well, God is unchangeable. Yes, but our understanding of God changes. Just as, and I've talked about this many times before, just as the sun does not change, our understanding of the sun has changed. So keep that in mind. And now we're seeing this whole powerful representation of God in that part we're skipping over, actually. That representing of God, making it clear that God is all powerful. He is more powerful than any human, so he's more powerful than the Pharaoh. He's more powerful than any so-called God. And this is communicated to the Egyptians. So that's what they're hearing. That's what they're learning, rather. And remember, all this is done because God has hardened the heart of Pharaoh in order for God to demonstrate to the Egyptians where the real power lies. Do you understand that? So there's a teaching going on here, and that happens consistently. You're going to find that in the entire Bible. You're going to find a teaching going on. One of the most really powerful theological things we deal with, believe it or not. You might say, well, that sounds a little crazy. No, I'm serious. The most powerful theological thing we deal with is your computer. Now, I'm not talking about any kind of deification of the computer at all, but what does your computer do? What does your literal graphic interface do? It's simple. It takes all the sophisticated movements, all the sophisticated actions of a computer, and puts them and presents them in ways that you can understand. So you have, for example, your graphic user interface, the GUI. Whether you're using Windows or Mac or Linux, or whatever, you have this graphic user interface. So instead of having to type the instructions to the computer of everything it does, the graphic user interface allows you to take actions that the computer calculates in the right way to do things. So you click on Microsoft Word, and Microsoft Word pops up. What you would have done without the graphic user interface is to set in a command that would say something. A long time since I used the original Windows and DOS and stuff like that. But you would type in the command line, and all the command lines needed to open up Microsoft Word. That doesn't happen anymore because of the graphic user interface. So what happens is the graphic user interface communicates to you in a way that you can understand, and then you communicate to the computer in the way the computer understands, and that's the what does it. So take that same idea and realize that when God is communicating to us, he can communicate any way he wants, but in order for us to understand it, he has to communicate in a way that we comprehend it. Do you understand? So he's not going to explain to people that the whole story at the time of the Exodus or in Genesis or anything about gravity, about atoms, about molecules, because they're not going to understand it at that time. Now, obviously, over many years, many millennia of the growth of human thought, we can understand atoms and molecules and everything else. And if God wanted to communicate to us that way, he could, because we understand it now. So what you'll see over and over again is a new form of communication. That's why when you go back and you read the Gospels and you see what Jesus has to say, and he's communicating these words and everything else, he's teaching you from this huge store of wisdom and knowledge, but in a way that you, or in the case of reading the Gospels, that the apostles can understand. So we'll give a good story. There is Jesus who's sleeping in the back of the boat, and the apostles who are panicked because a storm has arisen and Jesus is sleeping through the storm. And they panic and they wake him up, and he stands up and he shuts off the storm. What did he just communicate to the apostles? And he also says to them, which is said in the Bible 365 times, why were you afraid? And these powerful words are how he is communicating in actions, how he is communicating to the apostles a new way of thinking. So now let's go back to this story. We see the plagues happen, and what is God using as the plagues? We see all the different plagues, which is the part we've skipped over in the daily reading, but you can go back and read it. What is he communicating? He's communicating a message that the God of Moses, who is ultimately the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God is more powerful than anything the Egyptians have. And by hardening the heart of Pharaoh, he allows everyone, including the Hebrews and the Egyptians, to see the power of the Lord. Do you see that? So, and that same power exists in your life. Do you understand that? So it's really a form of communication. If you look at what Jesus does in the Gospels, he does a form of communication. He is teaching and he's communicating. So what do we look at what's happening here? Now, one of the things that's important to understand, and again, I get this from Dennis Prager from his Rational Bible series. Today, we're looking at, in the reading, the story of the Exodus, the Passover. Well, according to Dennis Prager, the greatest god in Egypt was represented by the lamb. So now what is happening? They are killing the lamb. They are using its blood for protection by order of God. Yet the Egyptians who put their trust in the God of the lamb see disaster happen. And what does that communicate? There is no greater God than the God of the Hebrews. That's communicated throughout the Old Testament. Do you understand? But then the obvious question is, well, why didn't God just turn around and try to communicate this message to everyone in such a way that it wasn't just the Hebrews who were saved, but everyone was saved? Because they aren't there yet. This is one of the things you have to understand when it comes to God is time. I've always said that if you were, the old pagan ways, the sun god, the moon god, the star god, if you were to give God a name, and in that, from that pagan realm, it would be the time god. Because what you watch with God is he communicates through time and because of time. That's what God does. And so as time, this is why evolution is so important. If you turn around and say, I don't believe in evolution, that's fine. You can say that. But the evolution you don't believe in is biological evolution. I do, but if you don't want to believe in that. But there's very clear a reality of evolution of thought, of evolution of culture, of evolution of spirituality, evolution. So there are all forms of evolution. And what people say when they disagree with Darwin is they don't believe in biological evolution. Okay, but that doesn't leave out the fact that there's other forms of evolution that are there, and that's clearly evident in the Bible. What we see is the Lord is leading the Jews to a deeper level of thought, and that's what's happening here. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. We'll be right back right after this.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media.
We're back, and we're talking about this powerful reality that's going on behind the scenes. Now, the way we see this is very simple. We see the Passover event happening, but really there's something more profound going on, and it's a form of communication. So, and this is throughout the Bible. It's a form of communication. Once we get to the New Testament and we get to the writings of St. Paul, that communication can be more direct. Because remember, if we were even to take the old model of how the Bible was put together, which scripture scholars no longer accept, but it doesn't matter. If we were to take even that model, the scriptures do not really exist in their final form at this time, because who wrote the Talmud, or the Torah rather, according to the old model? Moses did. Moses hasn't written it yet. You understand? But now we find out that these are actually oral stories that eventually were written down, and put together, and that becomes the Old Testament. In either case, it hasn't been put together yet, and certainly some of it hasn't been put together because it hasn't happened yet in this time frame here. So always keep that in mind. There is something bigger that's going on behind the scenes, and it's a communication. Now, and this is part of living the faith, is that this is something I teach all the time. You've heard me when I was doing the radio show and the podcast. You heard it through the podcast too. That's when the podcast was 2 15-minute episodes instead of one. You've heard me talk about that if we take faith and science and make a Venn diagram out of them, science, as huge as it is, and remember, we haven't even come close to reaching the limits of science. But science, big, huge Venn diagram representing science, big, huge circle, faith would be even a bigger circle, because faith represents a larger body of knowledge than we are capable of learning strictly through the material world. Okay? And that's what is being communicated, from this larger body of knowledge, so that we can have a deeper understanding of the truth. Do you understand all that? So here is what's happening. God is, through Moses and the Hebrews, is communicating to the Hebrews that he is the powerful God. Because remember, they watched all these plagues too. Not only did the Egyptians watch them, the Hebrews watched them. That he is, in fact, the powerful God. And he is more powerful than all the Egyptian gods combined, and infinitely more. That he has heard their response, that he is going to lead them into freedom, and in the process, he is demonstrating how the Egyptian gods have no power. And this is what is communicated. And why don't they have any power? And how is it that the Egyptians are supposed to understand that? Their knowledge is limited, so he has to go back to the graphic user interface idea. Their knowledge is limited, so it has to be communicated in a way that they can understand based on what they know, as limited as it is. Same thing with the Hebrews. And what's going to happen is God is going to, as we go along, start leading the Hebrews to a deeper understanding of this truth, and they're going to be rooted in the wisdom of God. That's spoken back, we're going to look further rather into the future. That's spoken by Moses, that the people need to understand that their God is this God of great, powerful wisdom. So, do you understand that? But that applies to you. Do you see that? And all these people, first of all, people will say, well, I'm not going to believe in God. I don't believe in God. I'm sorry, there is no God. Well, fine. If you want to believe that, but what you're telling me, and we talk about this all the time, what you're telling me is that all knowledge is summed up of what you know. There it is. And even if you turn around and say, there is greater knowledge out there than I know, but it's still, there is no God, then you're telling me that all knowledge is rooted in just what you know. What God is communicating to the Hebrews and to the Egyptians is no. There is a greater level of knowledge out there, and that's what we believe in. That's what we believe in. And so our role is to operate off the greater form of knowledge. Do you understand that? And to understand that level of knowledge. And that's why it's so important. Now, Socrates hit it on the head a long time ago. And Socrates was, as you know, executed as an atheist because he only believed in one God. And although Socrates wasn't there yet, but he understood that there was a greater knowledge. And how did Socrates define truth? How did Socrates define wisdom, rather? By knowing that you do not know. I used to have a license plate, 490. So 490 NOT, 490 And a friend of mine looked at it and says, that's the key to wisdom. For I know not. That is, Socrates says that's the beginning of wisdom. Why is that the beginning of wisdom? Because it recognizes that you do not know, therefore there is much more to know, right? Well, I was looking on X the other night, and it had there's one of these, several of these accounts will, especially to those of us who are in our 60s and 70s, will remind us of things that we grew up with. And you may or may not remember this, but Tootsie Pop had, there was the big question when you used Tootsie Pop. And the Tootsie Pop was, will anyone ever know how many licks it takes to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop? This whole thing. Because at the center, if you've never had a Tootsie Pop, it's a lollipop, and at the center is a bit of Tootsie Roll. So, how many licks? And they have this wise old owl, and the owl goes, 1... It licks it once, 2, licks it a second time, 3, licks it a third time, and then what most people do, bites the Tootsie Pop to get to the Tootsie Roll at the center of the Tootsie Pop. So he says, it hands the now eaten Tootsie Pop back and goes, 3. That's how many licks it takes to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop. Well, that's what happens with people who think they're smarter or they know all knowledge. This is the way it is. We know more, and this is all there is, because they don't have the capacity to say, I don't know. This is something that, was it Penn Jillette? Yeah, Penn from Penn and Teller, who's, I don't know if he's still an atheist. He may be, but he's always been an atheist, as long as I've known. Not that I know him, I don't. And he once said to a bunch of Christians, can't you just say, I don't know? That's the key, because that's the key to the beginning of knowledge, is I don't know. Now, obviously, we know a lot that we have learned, but the minute we say we know it all, we're lost. And there are many people in the church like that. Many that say, no, we know it all. And among the people who would say that I am correct when I make that statement, that we're lost when we say we know it all, is Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas is considered the greatest philosopher in Catholicism, extremely knowledgeable, and wrote many things. And among that, the whole pinnacle of Catholic theology is the Summa Theologica. And what does Thomas Aquinas say? At the culmination of everything he's done, everything I've done is straw. There is so much more than this. And this is the element of faith. This is one of the problems on X. Because you have X with people, no, this is the only truth and we have to follow this truth. Well, yes, but this isn't the complete truth. We don't have the complete truth per se because we haven't grown in our ability to fully understand the complete truth. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas meant when he said, all I've done is straw. There is so much more than this. For example, you can say, well, the truth is that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the afternoon. You can say that. You can teach that. And yeah, that's the truth. It is the truth, but it isn't the complete truth. There is so much more true than that. I was with a bunch of confirmation students, and we were looking at some clouds go by, and I said, actually, if you look at this, the clouds show us the movement of the earth. And he said, and how fast? One of the students said, and how fast is that? 1 mile an hour? I said, actually, it's 1,000. He's like, what? I said, right now, the earth revolves, if you're on the equator, or, because now we're getting into physics and vectors and math and calculus and stuff, and I don't know any of that. But if you were on the equator and measure how fast you are going as the earth spins, it's 1,000 miles an hour. and realize there was a time that people didn't understand any of that. They understood that the sun sun rose and set. They even believed that it was gods who carried the sun in a chariot, right? But they understood the truth. The sun rose in the morning and set in the evening. That part they understood. And that is absolutely true from our perspective, but it's nowhere near the full truth. And you could say, well, we know the truth. The sun rises in the morning and sets in the afternoon. Okay, but there's so much more than that you don't know. And the reason why you don't know is we haven't gotten there yet. This is what God is communicating. And so can you say, we know everything that God wants to communicate to us? No, we don't. Well, people will say, but all revelation is complete. Okay. But our understanding of revelation is not, because our knowledge is growing all the time. And so what we understood at one time, we still understand the same thing. We still understand the sun rises and sets, but now we see it from a different perspective. Now we understand what the sun is to some degree. We understand where the sun is. We understand where we are. We understand that it's really not the sun that moves, it's us that move. We understand not only the revolution, but also the orbits, and we understand all that. None of which changes the truth that, from our perspective, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and rises in the morning and sets in the afternoon. But our understanding of that simple truth has grown precipitously. We'll be right back right after this.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're at the end of this program. Almost. We got a few more minutes to go. We got 2 minutes, actually. We're close to the end of this program, and we've looked at this whole story of the Passover from now a new dimension. And the new dimension is that this is a form of communication. And as we go through the Old Testament and the New Testament, if you look at it from this perspective, one of the things I teach, when Jesus is speaking to the people, he has the full knowledge of everything, greater knowledge than you and I ever dreamed of having. And he is speaking from the store of knowledge. So think about what he is saying, what he said, and how it was understood at each of the times, how God's words are understood today. In today's reading, how you can understand the Gospels and Jesus, how he communicated and how people understood what he said in the Gospels, and even today. And you will see that there is this profound truth being communicated that we're still learning more about. There's two forms of truth. There's the human truth, which is trying to discover more and more of the world around us. And then there's the revealed truth from God that teaches us what we really can't discover on our own. And we put those together. So it's a combination of human knowledge and divine knowledge. And both are still growing. This is a powerful message of our faith. So anyone says, well, I don't believe.
well, then your understanding of the world around you is extremely limited. We'll be back on Monday. Have yourself a blessed day.